I think it's safe to say that the original Jujutsu Kaisen manga had a pretty rough ending. So, when it was announced that Gege's new and upcoming manga Majuro would actually be a continuation of Jujutsu Kaisen, I was instantly hyped, but also cautiously optimistic given again the controversial ending of the original manga. And after reading all 25 chapters on a weekly basis for over 6 months, I think it's safe to say I'm a pretty big fan. But is Modulo worth reading for the average Jujutsu Kaisen fan, particularly for fans who were burnt badly by the ending of chapter 271? The short answer is yes, but allow me to explain. Modulo's greatest strength is easily its exploration of the greater JJK timeline by presenting the reader with brief descriptions of major events that occurred after the fall of the Shinjuku Showdown, and even Kenjaku's deal with the US government having huge repercussions for Japan's global image, effectively killing all foreign relations and favoring isolation over globalization due to worldwide Jujutsu sorcerer trafficking in an effort to combat the inevitable energy crisis that will occur when all fossil fuels dry up. And all of this is quietly laid out within the first chapter alone, which really highlights Gege's ability to world build when he's not constantly crunching to meet Shueisha's outrageous weekly deadline. You can really feel Gege's love for both this world and characters throughout the entirety of Modulo's run. Of course, the main scenario of alien Jujutsu sorcerers immigrating to Earth is the defining factor that immediately separates Modulo from the original manga story. Sort of think of it as Danda Kaisen X JJK, minus the rom-com elements, for the most part at least. We're first introduced to the Samurians as these dangerous looking beings that give both Sukuna and Tengen a run for their money, but turn out to be pretty chill people when you get to know them, acting as a not so subtle metaphor for immigration and cultural divides between different countries and religious ideology. My biggest complaint surrounding Samurian sorcerers from a world building perspective is the fact we are never given an explanation or even an implication for how it's possible for every person from their homeworld to be proficient with cursed energy manipulation and heavenly restrictions. While on Earth, only Japanese people for the most part possess enough cursed energy output to inherit cursed techniques. Although I will applaud Gege for how he manages to differentiate the sheer skill gap between Samurian and human cursed techniques, with Samurians having inherently stronger cursed techniques like Chaos and Harmony, but lacking techniques that would be considered almost basic on Earth, like the reverse curse technique for example, on top of Samurians naturally having alternate names for cursed spirits and shikigami's in their culture. That being said, I heavily fuck with the idea of alien Jujutsu sorcerers and how this concept is laid out in Modulo. It even gives Geto's rebuttal to Yuta during the climax of Zero a deeper lore significance.
What I long for isn't any kind of enlightenment. It's a chosen people.
Technically, he was correct to a certain extent of Jujutsu sorcerers being a chosen people, which originally led me to theorize during Modulo's publication that there will be some massive revelation later in the story that all Jujutsu sorcerers are secretly descendants of ancient Sumerians. But for better or for worse, that didn't end up panning out. Guess Sukuna wasn't a lost alien after all. Gojo was just racist again. Which on the topic, the new characters introduced in the sequel are all genuinely fantastically written, particularly Deborah, who feels like the perfect opposition to Sukuna in terms of personality, while also having major parallels through his usage of cursed techniques, and even having strong ties to Gojo's isolation from lower level sorcerers, and his complicated relationship with Geto. Although despite Deborah stealing the spotlight in the later chapters of Modulo, the rest of the main cast still managed to shine brightly in their own unique way, while also calling back to the original series. Instead of focusing on Yuji's next of kin, Modulo subverts expectations by continuing where Panda's epilogue chapter left off and centers around the grandchildren of the now deceased Yuta and Maki, which also acknowledges the fact that Yuta was originally the main character in JJK 0, by properly establishing the characters of Yuka Okotsu and Tsurigi Okotsu, who for all intents and purposes are just gender-bent versions of Yuta and Maki, but with a twist. The best way to describe Yuka is if Yuta was a girl but with the bubbly personality of Yuji at the beginning of the original manga, while Tsurigi is more like a mix between Megami and Maki. He honestly kind of felt like the next generation of potential men when Modulo was first starting out, but eventually stands on his own merits at the end of the story, although it does teeter the line between cheap fan service and genuine hype moments and aura, but more on that in the spoiler section of the video. Yuka in comparison doesn't really have a lot in common with Yuta when it comes to fighting styles or even her curse technique, which genuinely caught me by surprise on a first read. It's even set up in the very first chapter if you pay close enough attention. Personally, Maru stands out as my favorite character introduced in Modulo. He's like Yuji if he had the strength of Gojo as a teenager. He also possesses the dumbest technique in the series that is barely explained and feels like a slight ass pull in the final 3 chapters, but it's whatever. Grade 1 source for my ass. You really want me to believe the guy who can flip gravity on a whim is on par with the likes of Nanami and Nobara? Get real. I guess there's also Cross, who outside looking almost identical to Maru, is just kind of an alright character. Like, I appreciate the way Gege handled this character, but at the same time, I feel he could have done more before serving as a genuinely tragic metaphor for police brutality and systematic racism. A shonen manga with heavy political undertones that goes beyond surface level symbolism? I thought I'd never see the day. Despite the very little amount of time we get to spend with these characters in the grand scheme of things, I feel that Modulo's casts are some of the best written characters Jujutsu Kaisen has to offer, especially the Bora, and how he shakes the status quo of how special great sources are written. Even the minor characters like Usami offer a unique spin on the more cliche elements of Jujutsu Kaisen. Usami picks up a Nanami-esque role as a mentor to the Okotsu siblings, and shares sympathy for the Simurian's plight in a similar way to Nanami's hesitance to kill Mahito's transfigured humans. Skip to this timestamp on screen. At first, I was a little skeptical of Yuji's role in Modulo, but as the story continued, I quickly changed my tune. With a character like Yuji, there's two paths you can take when developing a sequel. You can go the edgy route and make him a power fantasy insert like Kirito, Sasuke, or Yuta. The other and preferable path is you take the Goku Naruto route. You can flanderize every trait your main character possesses until they're a shell of their former selves, and not completely out of character. Which path did Gege take? The mythical third option. You give your main character a natural evolution. Whoa. Modulo Yuji is a man ravaged by grief and guilt, voluntarily exiling himself from Jujutsu society due to his survivor's guilt of watching all his friends age and die around him, while Yuji is perpetually a teenager, not aging a single day thanks to his cursed lineage and a suitable consequence for gaining more power by absorbing his siblings pre-Shinjuku. It's genius and turns the last words of Wasuke against Yuji, warping his hopes for Yuji's future into quite possibly the worst curse that could afflict Yuji and erode his upbeat friendly personality. In contrast, I'm a bit mixed on Mahito though, and the third act of Modulo as a whole. At first, his inclusion feels like cameo slop, but over time is flipped on its head as a major plot point for the endgame of Modulo, which is a little undercooked in all honesty. Although I personally love how Gege brings back Yuki and Geto's conversation from season 2. On first watch, I was convinced this was foreshadowing an ending that would wipe out Jujutsu sorcerers to prevent the cycle of curses from continuing. But by the time Jujutsu Kaisen's ending rolled around, this scene suddenly felt like nothing more than an underdeveloped plot point, but thanks to Modulo, Gege was able to effectively correct his flaw in the early stages of the story. That being said, Mahito being here thematically makes sense because of his cursed technique, although ends up feeling like nothing more than cameo slop to engagement farm on Twitter with a short-lasting rematch against Yuji. I might have over-exaggerated that a little. Maru's curse technique makes no fucking sense though. The idea of chaos and harmony as a curse technique is very intriguing on paper, but in execution, it felt like nothing more than Gege's way of giving a prominent character a get out of jail free card. By the final chapter, it feels like Maru's curse technique is whatever Gege wants it to be, without any setup or explanation, and that really frustrates me. I agree that not every single element of a piece of fiction should be explained in great detail to an audience, but I feel that in a case like Maru, we should have at least got a small paragraph detailing how exactly his curse technique even functions. It's also a very minor gripe I have with the Bora's curse technique, which sort of feels like the super edgy, cool, and mysterious curse technique that's so powerful it can't even be comprehended by mortal minds. I like how the text box is cracked though. Tsurugi summoning the split soul katana using Rika's inventory is stupid hype moments in aura. In fact, that entire fight between Tsurugi and Maru was a little disappointing in all honesty, which is a bit of a shame given this is the only true big moment for Tsurugi to demonstrate his skills as a swordsman. This fight has the most interesting use of Rika going for it though. I'll give it that. The surprising lore drop surrounding how cursed spirits function was also very welcome. It helps to make them feel more unique rather than just being evil otherworldly spirits. Still doesn't explain why Simurian Kalians take on the appearance of almost mythological animals, while cursed spirits on Earth are more monstrous, other than creating any parallel themes and such, I suppose. Speaking of cursed spirits, what the fuck happened to Megami? It just further cements how undercooked this trio is. Thanks, Gege. I'm also a bit mixed on how Wee Wee was used. Don't get me wrong, it's genuinely disturbing to see how Mei's grooming destroyed all its self-worth, but I feel this is a concept that should have been saved for a longer story that can afford to flesh out its side characters more, which Modulo isn't really able to do because of its 25 chapter limit, causing the majority of its side characters to feel very two-dimensional. We don't even get half of the new sorcerers' names from the actual story. They came from the volume extras. Chiharu's name is never spoken until the epilogue, despite her having a considerable amount of screen time compared to most side characters. Also, they give Toto so much more aura. Go off, King. The pacing also could have been better, which is also a problem with the original Jujutsu Kaisen. Modulo starts off with a relatively slow pace before picking up in the middle and then dead sprinting to the finish line after chapter 20, creating a number of unanswered questions that only serve to break the audience's immersion. Like, how are they just able to cross over into the afterlife? How does chaos and harmony even work? Please, Gege, explain! Although I'm very intrigued to see where a far future spin-off could take JJK, with a lack of future sorcerers and almost certain energy crisis long after Yuji split into 10 fingers, could make for a worthwhile one-shot. With all that being said, I think Modulo is easily Gege's best writing without a shadow of a doubt. The main characters all feel fleshed out by the end, it creates a satisfying conclusion for long-time readers, enriches the world building established in the original manga, holds a relevant political message that doesn't censor itself to please both sides, and boasts beautiful artwork from Yuji Iwasaki. I honestly wouldn't be disappointed if from now on, Gege was just a writer while Iwasaki handled art for future Jujutsu Kaisen spin-offs. Truly one of the greatest manga duos in recent times. At its core, Modulo is a story about two very distinct yet similar cultures that are at war with each other over the right to exist. A message that unfortunately reflects the current culture and political landscape of the modern world. And throughout Modulo's entire run, Gege is constantly reminding the reader of this, even spelling it out a little too obviously at times, but still manages to feel like a natural evolution of the original manga's message of similarly disregarding closed-minded people in favor of beneficial and positive change. While Modulo isn't a perfect story, it's definitely the best Jujutsu Kaisen storyline. So should you read Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo? Undoubtedly yes. If you even remotely enjoyed Gege's storytelling approach and bombastic fight choreography that made the heights of JJK in its prime so iconic. In the end, that's what Modulo feels like, a return to prime Gege, prime JJK, reminding the audience of how and why they fell in love with Jujutsu Kaisen in the first place, while also offering a new perspective on this world and its characters without detracting from the original material. Whatever Gege or Iwasaki have in store for the future of Jujutsu Kaisen, I know for a certainty that I'll be there day one, and it's all thanks to the incredible display of art that was Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo. And thank you for not being Jujutsu Kaisen Next Generations. Fuck you, Boruto.